Hello and welcome to the MLSecOps Podcast. I'm going to be hosting today. I'm Diana Kelley and I'm the CISO here at Protect AI. And joining us is a just fantastic person who, if you haven't heard of him, I don't know where you've been, Caleb Sima, who is currently a builder and founder of WhiteRabbit, which is a venture, I'm forgetting what it is. It's a
Cybersecurity venture studio. Yeah, which is a mouthful. But basically, it's a startup that tries to create cybersecurity startups. So that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you certainly know about startups. I think I met you back in 2005, and you had founded Spy Dynamics at that time. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. It was those were the good old days, right?
The early days of DAST. Yeah,
the early days. That's right.
Yeah, so you've been at this a long time, extraordinarily successful. So we're really thankful and grateful that you're here to join us on the show today. Our audience knows a lot about MLSecOps and AI security, but they may not know how you intersect with it. And specifically, what have you seen about that in your career? And what led you to the work you're doing today with the Cloud Security Alliance and AI safety?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I'll start from the beginning and tell the story, which I think my intersection with really, I would say, machine learning, not even AI, was when I started at Databricks. So I joined Databricks to become sort of their head of security, or really security CTO, I believe was my official first title in joining the company. Where I started, it was a very small. Databricks now is a fairly well-known space or company in machine learning, but at the time it was 300 employees or so. But how I got there, it's funny. I had my first child, my daughter, Ava, actually, and I took a year off to kind of figure out what it's like to be a dad. And at the time I really wanted to dig into more hands-on tech stuff. So there's two things I really wanted to learn about at the time. I wanted to learn about crypto, right? Blockchain. And I wanted to learn about machine learning. These were like the two things I wanted to learn. As I went through that year, really diving deep into that, machine learning was just so amazing to me, and with so many adjacencies that I just got obsessed. And that led me over to Databricks, where I'm proud and honored to say I worked with probably some of the smartest people in machine learning that you could possibly be around. And I spent a good amount of time in Databricks doing that. And then I went to Robinhood to be the chief security officer over there. And then during that time frame, I thought I was up to date with machine learning. Like my time in Databricks, I learned machine learning. I learned a lot of this stuff. And then during my time at Robinhood, ChatGPT broke out. LLMs broke out. And all of a sudden, I started, it's an entirely different world. And everything was moving so fast. At the time, I'd spent about 2.5 years at Robinhood, and I was trying to learn about LLMs and learn about AI. And I just realized, you know what? I cannot do this with the family. I got to go take the time to go do this. So I left Robinhood. I said, it's time. I am going to focus on learning AI and catch up to it. And so I spent 4 to 6 months literally as my job, 9 to 5, reading, building, understanding. And I just started posting on LinkedIn all the references and sources I was learning from. And all of a sudden, I guess people started noticing and they started following. And then somehow I became an AI expert. Just, which, by the way, I am not an AI expert. I just happened to really want to catch up and learn as much as I could. And really, I wanted to learn the fundamentals, right? The real basic building blocks. And so that's sort of how I think, the intersection of quote AI came into my life.
Yeah, it's amazing that, we start reading, we start learning, and it was wonderful. You were sharing with others, and then that's it. You are an AI expert now.
Well, they say, I'm telling you, I am not. It's just, I happen to be able to take the 3 months or so to study and learn the basics. And that's allowed me to, I think, take a good first principles view of everything that comes into AI, which I don't think a lot of people have the capability, but will over time.
They will. You were at the beginning, you were at the forefront of DevSecOps and building security into the development lifecycle. As you look at MLSecOps or AI SecOps, how do you frame building security in and securing machine learning?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that's, I think, where my intersection with CSA, or the Cloud Security Alliance, really came into play. Because at the time, I was learning a lot of the basics and fundamentals of how does an LLM work and how does it behave and what does it do. And of course, as security people, when AI started coming around, everyone puts the brakes, and there's a lot of like fear, uncertainty, and doubt being thrown around AI and what you need to be scared of and what you don't need to be scared of. And well, let me be clear. There's no one saying you need to not be scared of something. Everyone was, you need to be scared of everything in AI. It's threat to humanity, threat to nation, threat to everybody, right? And so, and when I was going through this, I was like, hey, like, there are legitimate things to be afraid of. Like, we need to understand how to manage risk here. And there are easy ways to go and implement sort of controls around this. But what I was missing is no one was really talking about practical things a security team can do to help mitigate risk if you are building a model, if you are using a model. Like, what does this look like? And so Jim, who was the founder of CSA at the time, and I were talking, and he's like, this is exactly what happened with cloud, right? When cloud came out, everyone had the fear, everything was stairs, and there's no practical guidelines around what matters, what can an enterprise security team do in order to help mitigate the risk. So he's like, AI is bigger than cloud. We need to do the exact same thing. So Jim and I sort of joined forces. And CSA is sort of a nonprofit, so I donate my time, and I helped create the AI Safety Alliance with CSA. And we went and we basically, the motto was very simple. My mission was, I want to build practical guidelines around how to secure AI. No fear, no craziness, just, hey, by the way, did you know 98% of the things you do to secure an AI ML pipeline is all the same stuff you know today? It's nothing different. It's like access control, patching, system management. It's just on a different flow and a different pattern. And so building that together. So we were able to get all of the great CISOs together from all of the great model providers, from Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, AWS. Like, a lot of these people joined and helped because they also wanted to go. And so we ended up getting 2,000 or so volunteers in this area to help kind of build practical guidelines. So that's what we're in the middle of. In fact, I just got back where we had sort of an in-person building of the new AI control matrix around what does that look like, and how do we look at an MLSecOps pipeline, and what's practical, what are the things that are model specific versus what are just generic controls, and how to do them.
Yeah. And as you're building that out, and as you talk to CISOs, both that are volunteering and working with you, and to CISOs that are just getting up to speed, what are some of the things that you recommend they do to integrate ML security into their existing security program?
I think a lot of, first, I'll take this from a broad spectrum, and then I'll kind of dive down specific. There's a lot of things I think enterprises and CISO specifically are trying to understand when it comes to an AI program, AI governance. What does all this mean? I won't go into that. I'll go down to the very, very specific technical, like, okay, what are you doing? Right? Like, for example, most organizations today are using a foundational model. They are using, when I define that foundational frontier model, I am using OpenAI. I am using Anthropic. I am using Gemini, right? Like, these are the things I think most organizations are doing today. And they're just trying to figure out what your use case is. And so I think a lot of this has to do with your use case. You are not building models. You are probably not fine-tuning models. But what you are probably doing is maybe using things like RAG, where you are adding data to your model to be parsed. And so you just have to think about your data pipeline. That, I think, becomes the most important when you think about what you're doing, is okay, if I do have RAG and I'm adding data, where does that data come from? How am I cleaning that data? How am I formulating that? And also, more practically, what sort of access permissions am I applying on that data? Or really, a great question to ask is, well, if I'm using a vector database for this, do I have the ability to put access permissions on this? And so, these I think are the basics at what enterprises are dealing with. And they're going from what I would say the most obvious answers for, which is most people are building chat bots or other kinds of search functionality, wiki functionality, and they're just building it in very, very simple single tenant like models, which is the finance group has a RAG database, the engineering group has a RAG database, the HR people crew has a RAG database, and then the model itself will pool in its own form. It has its own access to finance, engineering, and people, and then there's no intersection, right? Like that's the way that it works. Or some are trying to just figure out, well, I have a single RAG database and a single LLM pipeline. How do I manage permissions now between engineering, HR, finance? And that becomes a little bit more difficult. Then you start to think about, well, what about prompt injection, which, by the way, is out of all of the attacks, I think today is the most enterprise applicable problem. And is not a solved problem. And it is a deep problem. However, I will tell you some of the mistakes that I see people make, which is, they believe, hey, actually where I need to put something like an AI guardrail or a prompt or an AI firewall, LLM firewall. I don't know, Diana, what do you call your, what's the accepted term that you guys
I keep hearing AI firewall.
AI firewall. Okay. Yeah. It's interesting because the definitions, when you say firewall, everybody thinks on the external, from the external public to the inbound to the API. So people will say, I'll put sort of this AI firewall at a network layer, at the AI layer, where my employee or my customer is writing their text prompt, by the way, not multimodal, text prompt, and then it will analyze it, look for prompt injection, deny it, etc. However, what they're missing out on, and I think this is very critical, and most people have not thought about this, is that prompt injection comes from everywhere, not just an employee writing something in a chat bot. It comes from a document. It can come from metadata from an image. It can come from an email content. It comes from everywhere.
Another LLM.
Another LLM. That's a great point. And so this is like cross-site scripting and SQL injection back in the app days. It's the exact same thing. It can come from anywhere. And so you really need to think about putting LLM firewalls in your orchestration layer where your messaging passaging is going on. Like I am taking things in an orchestration layer from an agent, from content, from a data, passing it to LLMs, taking the output of LLM, passing it to another LLM. Your orchestration is really your router. And so you need to inspect for prompt injections at your router, quote unquote, in your AI, not just this external viewpoint of where things are. And so I think that is another sort of, I don't think the market or the industry has gotten to the point of recognizing these kinds of things yet.
Yeah, and I love that you're pointing out the input validation and sanitization, because I've been thinking about that a lot. We looked at something like SQL injection. It's a pretty easy problem. Now, I realize it's been pernicious and it's still out there on we still see it. It's still exploited. It's still not, we still see developers not doing it, but it's an easy problem. We know the fix. I start thinking about how we sanitize inputs to LLMs, and it's right. I mean, the complexity of that, because we have to be able to accept what humans say.
You don't. Yeah. And also look at cross-site scripting as another great example as a relevant, which is people gave up on trying to do input for cross-site scripting. Yeah. They just decided to go on output, right? Which is, okay, I'll just, anything that's outputted, I'll just encode, which has been a sort of acceptable method on refusing this. But the problem with LLMs is there's, I've always broken this up, and it's a control plane, data plane problem, right? Which is SQL injection and cross-site scripting have very similar methodologies with very different impacts, right? But the methodology is effective, which is I'm taking untrusted data and treating it as trusted data, which is I'm taking data, making it into control plane data. And it executes in a browser or it gets executed by a database. With an LLM, it's the exact same thing. I am taking untrusted data from a person or thing or wherever it is, and it's being passed to an LLM like a command, because an LLM does not understand the difference between a command and data, right? There's no difference between control plane and data plane. And as far as I can tell, I don't know if there's a way at which that does get created. At least, there are different ways, but I have not seen the solution. And when that happens, maybe then you can, solve a prompt injection problem. But like that is the real issue. And so you can't input this, you can't output this, except to use another model in order to analyze the input and the output. But yeah.
Right. We're all just going to be it's just going to be model on model on model. And we're just going to be.
I mean, you say that in jest, but that is probably the reality.
It is. Yeah. And one thing that you've worked on actually to help people understand the risks is the AI model risk management framework for CSA. I was wondering if you could walk a little bit through, what it is and how organizations can benefit from using it.
Yeah, it's a much more higher level view of, hey, what are the things that I need to think about when it comes to models, a governance program, a process? So like, we're still at our infancy in trying to understand AI. And so we need to first understand, well, okay, where are models being used in our organization, right? Like, I think today it's easy. Most people are calling these foundational models. But if you want to fast forward, or even some enterprise people are using Llama or Minstrel or open weight models at which can be contained on their infra. But as we fast forward, I think there'll be more smaller models. More and more people are going to be downloading these from Hugging Face, deploying them in enterprise environments. You have to start thinking about, okay, where are my models? Where are they being used? What's the right word to say this? What is sort of the supply chain, right, of the model? What is the SBOM of the model? Where does it come from? What's the reputation of the model? So you want to create model cards to start saying, okay, one, where are my models? What are my models doing? What versions are they at? What reputation are they in? What data did it get created from? What is it acting on? Right? Like there's almost a behavioral profile that says my model is making decisions about inbound candidates, right? My model is making decisions on customer, purchase items and predictions, like my model is rewriting emails, like there needs to be these profiles, these things that gets defined so that you understand where in your organizations these things are being used, how they're being used, the reputation of the places that are having all of those kinds of things. You also need to understand where the models are being deployed. What are the sets of protections that you have around that model? If the model is open weight, clearly, is it just sitting on an open S3 bucket with no privileges and everybody can access it and change the model and then therefore could entirely disrupt what that model's behavior could be? Is it running an inference at places in containers that have the wrong access? You have to think about these things as production servers. You don't want engineers SSHing or accessing prod, and especially if it's running in a model, right? If data is being fed into that model and inference, how are you protecting that? What's the privacy around that? Can you put them in enclaves and have the data go into the enclave in the model? And then we as an enterprise have no visibility of the data going into the model, right? Like there's a lot of these sort of thought processes. I think we kind of drive down into that to kind of look at both at a high level, your model, the governance around your model, the organizational impact, who in your organization should be involved in those models, how they get deployed, what are the kinds of things you want to think about. So that really is sort of the driver behind that.
Yeah, and completely agree about AI bill of materials. We need different information. We need to understand model provenance, exactly all the things you were talking about. And if we don't have that, we're not going to be able to properly govern. the
Yeah.
deployments.
And it's, there's a lot of, we've already seen the vulnerabilities come from, it's the basic ones, right? But,
Right.
you can actually, when you download models, they have this way of executing code. No one really looked at that. So, it's just like, there's all these basics, but you're right. Like, it's really interesting because the problem with models, there's no visibility and you don't know how it will behave. And there's so like if I download a model from Hugging Face that is specifically around classification, right? How do I determine that it is classifying the right things, or the model that I'm downloading is the model that was truly intended to do the purpose that I think it's supposed to do? Like, how do I know about the deviations if someone got malicious with it, if they swap the model out? Like, there's just a lot of these problem spaces that is going to be super fascinating.
Yeah, and very few organizations are scanning those models before they use them. I
agree.
Which, you scan a PDF that comes in your email, but you're not scanning the model that you're downloading.
And largely, I think it's because as enterprises, we're so early. Again, going back to this point, most people are going to be using OpenAI and Anthropic and Google. So you're not only really large enterprises today are really starting to go down in this. I'm really going to start like downloading random models off Hugging Face and deploying them in prod. Like, there's not a lot yet, at least that I can tell, but that is coming, right?
Yeah. Do you have any tips to talk to ML engineers, data scientists, help them? We talk a lot about in the MLSecOps community about education and helping to educate security teams on how AI and ML work, but also to educate the AI and ML folks on how risk management works. Have you had any opportunity to do that and any guidance on how we can really make those conversations beneficial?
No, I haven't. And, you bring up a really good question, and actually, I think a pretty big gap. Because like Diana, I don't know what I would say. There's obviously the data cleaning PII part. I feel like these are obvious things. There's a permissions part around like, hey, do all data engineers or scientists need to have access to the model in prod? Or like, do they need access? Do they need access to the raw data, just the structured data, the filtered data? Like, there's a lot of this sort of, permissioning kind of thing. But like, what would I tell a data scientist about how to think about security is a good question. I don't know the answer. I really don't.
There's something I read last year, and it simultaneously made me so happy and really, really sad, which was a data scientist wrote a Medium post about Jupyter notebooks, which, data scientists use a lot. And it said, hey, you know what? It's really not a good idea to store secrets, things like passwords and API keys in the notebooks because they're not encrypted. And this is actually a risk. So to all my other data scientist folks, hey, we should really stop doing this. And,
Yes. You know what? I am. That is also a very proud. I agree with you, Diana. That is a very proud. What's also fascinating to me is most people are under the impression or do not understand that Jupyter notebooks are code. They don't treat Jupyter notebooks the same way they treat code.
Yeah.
And they do not go under the same level of scrutiny. A lot of them don't even get put into GitHub. I learned like there's like a lot of these things that when you talk to some of these enterprises, that switch has not flipped, right? That this is code, needs to be scanned and analyzed the same way that we do code today, needs to have the same permissions and thoughts around code today, because actually notebooks as code in production is a thing, right? And so this is something I think most security people are just not aware of yet.
Yeah. I think more communication, more collaboration, communication between the teams. I think that'll really help us in the long run.
Yeah.
So you spent a lot of time studying AI and ML, helped CSA move forward and really start to establish frameworks. What are you looking at in the next 6 to 12 months? Where do you think the real issues, where should we be be focusing our attention as security professionals?
Man, this is an interesting one. I've always sort of been waiting because I have by and large, I've felt that quote unquote AI security is not really hit mainstream yet because most enterprises have just not gotten to the point of just saying, what is my use case for this thing and deploying it. However, the things that I think are going to become super interesting and challenging security problems in the future is obviously agents. Right? Like we have been using, I actually have a presentation where I've got this model of sort of how we use AI today, how we use AI tomorrow, how we use AI in 2 years. And like, I'll sort of represent that verbally here. We have largely interacted with it with text, right? We have largely used public information. Our use cases have been more about search and translation and creation in terms of our models, right? And what we do with it. I think you're seeing the movement now. Like I call that yesterday. They called this today. The way we interact with it is now text and voice, right? And you're seeing that start to kind of come into play. Images, obviously, you're passing in images for this. A lot of the sort of ways at which we're starting to use this in some instances is more friends dating. There's virtual girlfriends, AI girlfriends. There's mentoring. There's a lot of these sort of, actually, who was it that just was it Mark Benioff that says he uses AI as a therapist right now? I think he just published that
I hadn't
a week
seen
ago
that.
or 2 weeks. Yeah.
All right.
It's now you're starting to see it take off a more of a advising human interaction kind of capability. You're starting to see it in agents start to make some decisions, and it's starting to get some actions, right? So, hey AI, I really need to solve I'm just going to make this up, calendaring problem. Can you figure out how to help me in calendaring? Yes. Here is your calendaring today. I see someone has invited you to calendar tomorrow. I will make the changes on your calendar to adopt, right? Okay, now it's both thinking, reasoning, and deciding and acting. Then now things start getting really, really interesting, right? And then you start thinking about permissionings. You start thinking about intent. You start thinking about this. And then if you go to tomorrow, where I think, and also, by the way, the data is starting to become enterprise data, right? Like that's where all this is. And then tomorrow, you may interact with it in video. You may interact with robotics, right? Machines and physical things and how you may interact with it. I think the data that it consumes will be personal data, enterprise data, public data, all that, and maybe real-time data, right? Like when no one's really thought about an LLM streaming and analyzing logs in real time, right? Because the context windows just aren't there. The capability is just not, performance is just not there, but it will get there. And so when it starts analyzing real-time data, then when you think about the things it does, it will then start reasoning, deciding, and acting at scale. So now instead of making a decision on my calendar, I might manage the entire enterprise's employees' calendaring, right, at scale, or manage production infrastructure monitoring at scale, and making decisions on when to reboot something or not reboot something, or patch something or not patch something. I think security, when we start getting into these modes, becomes super fascinating. The example I always comes to mind is if you have an AI assistant, you have to give it permissions to access your email. And you probably will give it permissions to access your social network. How do you prevent it from posting your email to your social network? Like, it has to have permissions from both. It doesn't have the knowledge to know not to do that is a great question. If someone prompt injected it to do that, would it not know how to do that or not is a great question. And if it did do that, what repercussions does it really have? How do you punish an AI? How do you hold an AI accountable? is like soup. So I think those are really, really fun problems, really fun security issues to think about.
Yeah.
I think about when LLMs, models to model communication, would be super fascinating and super security interesting because, hey, like right now they all communicate via English and text, but that is not the most efficient way to communicate. So when an LLM model starts talking to another LLM model, it'll be like, how will it, if you say, just make up the most efficient way to communicate to another model, what would it do? Like when that starts happening, like, how do you even get visibility? Like, how do you, like, it's just very mind boggling. So these are futuristic, funky things I like to think about.
No, it is. It's really fascinating. And somebody actually has already done a worm that they called Morris that was on indirect. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, prompt. And there's an interesting chaining attack where if you're using LangChain, there's math chain. And what it does is it translates the equation into Python so it can be parsed down the line by the next LLM. And the input attack here is rather than giving it an equation, giving it Python commands, which then
yes.
Yeah. I mean, so I know how are we going to, anything else that you think of, governance and how we're going to govern these systems as we continue to.
No, I wish I had great answers to what does governance look like. Yeah. But the most simplistic way I think about governance is I need to treat AI the same as I would treat an individual. So what are the permissions at which I give it? What's the restrictions? What's the time? What's the guardrails? Like, these are all like, what's the job? What's the focus? These are all the things you try to restrict and say, what is the same governance and how can I do that? But, I think everybody and their brother is trying to figure out what is governance for AI. To some extent, I think we are kind of shooting ourselves in the foot in some instance, by we don't even know what's coming in the next year. And so we kind of like make this stuff up and it just becomes irrelevant in 6 months. Right.
Yeah. So as you're looking though out into security, and you must hear so many and see so many great ideas, with WhiteRabbit, what are you looking at? What are you excited about in terms of AI security?
I am excited. AI is both the most overhyped thing in the world, but also not without some real relevance there, right? Like it is going to change things. But I think very similar to cloud, it will take time, right? Like cloud, everyone got super hyped about cloud. Everybody was lifting and shifting their systems into cloud, calling themselves a cloud company. And then there was like this whole like dip of, the crash of the cloud hype. This is not that. It's actually more expensive lifting and shifting my stuff into cloud than it is me running it on-prem. And then you started seeing the startups who started truly building their companies around cloud. Like their entire company was cloud first. They molded themselves around the technology, not try to mold the technology around their business, right? Yeah. And then that started really, I think, creating, wow, it's not lift and shift, it's shared services, it's scalability, it's, all of these things that, I can now truly take 3 people and do what 15 did, right? And I think that's when you started seeing what was really capable, the shift of capabilities happened. And I think AI is the same, right? We're seeing a bunch of enterprises, chatbots, rewrite some simple, actually everyone's calling, I'm in the middle of writing a blog post right now about no one's defined what an agent is. So everyone who has some automation is calling it an AI agent now. It's just like, everyone is just doing this same thing we saw in cloud. And the hype is dying, as it should, because I think there's way too high expectations for it. And I also think people are implementing it wrong. But what I'm getting excited about, what you're seeing today, is people who are truly building AI core companies, and what that looks like. Similar, what is cloud core company, that's what changed everything. And AI core companies is the thing that I'm saying. They're wrapping their business around AI because that's what they're starting with. And so that is fascinating to watch.
So the AI native companies.
The AI native, yes.
Yeah.
And, I think it's going to take us a year or two to really start seeing the real value being created by AI native, right?
Yeah. Fascinating.
What do you actually? Is it just about me? But Diana, I'd love to hear. I want to hear your thoughts on some of the futuristic and these things.
Well, I completely agree with you that I think we have to get through the hype cycle and the trough of despair, and the whole sense of, magically the sparkles are going to do everything we want them to do. That's not the reality. The reality is an AI just is magically going to fix all of our problems. So I like that. I think people are starting to actually discover the real use cases and understand also the time and effort it takes to train up the AI, because some folks decided they were going to do a lot of training in use cases that you really don't need AI for. So I think that people are getting a lot more grounded. And I do like some of these like approaches that are kind of leveraging the AI out into a way that a human isn't going to be as good at. So one of the things I got really excited about recently is there's a disinformation bot that, that some researchers have developed. And this thing has all the time in the world to be very patient. It doesn't get upset. It doesn't start saying, you're first. And it's actually been really effective with people that have gone down really deep conspiracy holes. Yeah. And it's hard to talk them out of it. But the bot has the patience and the time to continue having that conversation. And it's been fairly successul.
So is this thing out? Can I go use this now?
I read about it. I don't know if it's usable. So it may just be within research, but that kind of, it's that approach. It's starting to turn this around of, it's not just magic that's going to fix things, but how does AI do the thing that it's best at doing? Also, obviously, we see this with machine learning, but massive amounts of data in security, there's no way that we can parse it all. And machine learning, AI are so powerful there. So those are some of the things that I get excited about, the stuff that humans don't do well. It's nice when it's a chatbot that we interact with and it gives us an outline for a blog that we're writing. But that to me isn't the real power of it. The power is that part that humans really could need and insist on. Like, who has the patience to help somebody out of a conspiracy hole? Not a lot of people.
I actually would love to have a troll bot. Speaking of disinformation bot, that will analyze the social network posts and then will automatically keep track of a troll score so that you can immediately filter them out.
I think you just created a new service.
That is something AI would be good at. It can look at this thing and be like, over a history of this guy's a troll. And like every post, this is a troll post. Like, I'm going to build a score. You can get a filter. It says anything in my stream that is like a below 80 troll score, completely ignore.
Right. They're just out. They're no longer in I know. I mean, I think there are a lot of, as we move past it's magical, going to solve all our problems and into the actual problems we can solve, I think it's going to be pretty fascinating.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, it's good. There's a lot of cool stuff, I think, that, we're really going to see come out. So I am excited about that.
But we do have to keep it safe. And thank you for your work at the CSA AI Safety Initiative. How can people find out more information about that?
Just head to the webpage, and you can go there, find all the information. We've published all the documents, guidelines, help join one of the groups. Would be happy to have you and help sort of define these guidelines, which I think are very much needed.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And again, to underscore, yes, join, be a part of the work. If you're listening to this and you got wowed by what Caleb was saying and said, I want to help, you can help. So please go over to CSA and join the Safety Initiative. I'm also
going to be publishing, actually, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. I'm going to post a blog that I've been working on building a little bit. I wanted to build a marketecture of what does the AI ops look like. So I have one and I've been working on it for a little while. I'm going to publish that probably today or tomorrow. You can So if you want, on my LinkedIn, I've got a newsletter. I'm going to post it there.
All right. So everybody be on the lookout, because by the time that this airs, you will have published it, I think. So check out Caleb's AI Ops. And security is going to be in there, right? AI
There's a little bit. It's mostly like, hey, here's how, and then I do put in my there's little small plugs around. If you're a security, these are the things that are more relevant for you. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. It was so good to speak with you, and thank you so much for sharing all your insights and everything you're working on. It's just amazing.
Happy to be here.
And thank you, everybody who stayed here and listened to this episode of MLSecOps. Once again, I'm your host, Diana Kelley, and we are so grateful for your support of this community and all the work that our leader, Charlie McCarthy, does to help educate people on AI security. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Protect AI, and of course, a huge thank you to you, Caleb Sima, for being here. We're so grateful. If you want to check out the show notes for links to the resources that we mentioned, please do that. And we'll see you next time on the MLSecOps Podcast. Thanks.